My name is Elena Ross, and for 5 years, I walked into the Sinclair Court building every morning at 7:45 a.m., coffee in one hand, keycard in the other. I was always early, always prepared, always invisible in the way that people who run things quietly tend to be. That morning felt no different at first. The glass doors slid open with their usual soft hum. The security guard gave me a distracted nod. I smiled back, not really expecting anything more. My heels clicked against the tile in the lobby. The elevator was empty. I pressed the 19th floor and leaned back, still mentally reviewing the rollout plan we'd finalized last night. It was the biggest contract Sinclair had ever touched. $46 million in infrastructure design, 3 continents, 6 vendors, and 12 months of due diligence. I'd led it from zero. No announcement, no celebration, just a calendar invite for follow-up. I reached my desk and set down my tumbler. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No Slack pings, no email notifications. My monitor stayed black. I tapped the mouse. Nothing. Pressed the power button. Still nothing. That's when the red light on my phone blinked. It was a message from HR. Subject line, role update. I opened it slowly, still thinking it might be an onboarding error. 5 sentences. Cold. Final. Your role has been made redundant effective immediately. Your credentials have been deactivated. Do not attempt to access internal systems. Exit logistics will be handled externally. No signature, no salutation, just those lines like a guillotine. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, not quite processing what had just happened. Outside my cubicle, someone laughed. The sound was jarring. A team member walked by sipping coffee, scrolling through a report. Around me, the world went on like I hadn't just been erased. I tried my badge on the backup terminal. Access denied. I checked my personal phone again, hoping for a follow-up, some clarification. There was nothing. No call, no meeting, no warning. Just silence. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Less than 12 hours ago, I'd been walking a global board through final stage documentation. I'd stayed late tweaking a compliance clause, adding a contingency line they didn't even ask for, but would need. Now, I didn't even exist. I leaned back in my chair and just sat there listening to the hum of the overhead lights. It was surreal, like watching a movie of someone else's breakdown. I wasn't angry, not yet, just hollow. There was something almost elegant in how cleanly it had been done. A deletion, not a confrontation. They didn't argue with me. They didn't even tell me I was wrong. They just deleted me, and somehow that was worse. I opened the drawer to my right more out of habit than intent. That's when I saw it. A folded note, a black USB drive. The note was short, 5 words in familiar handwriting. You built this. Take it back. Zoya. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just placed the note in my lap, thumbed the edge of the USB, and let the weight of it settle in my hand. It wasn't just data. It was every strategy, every architecture I had written from scratch. My fingerprints were all over it, even if Sinclair had tried to scrub my name off the record. I looked around the office once more. No one had noticed I was gone. That was the part that stayed with me the most. Not the firing, not the email. The fact that in 5 years I had mattered so little to so many that my erasure didn't cause a ripple. That's when something in me shifted. Not rage, not vengeance, just a sharp, undeniable clarity. I stood up slowly, picked up my tumbler, slid the USB into my bag. No one looked up. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. By the time I stepped outside, the city was already awake. Cars honking, a bus braking too hard. The smell of cinnamon from the bakery across the street. It was the last morning I ever walked out of that building. And the first morning, I realized I didn't need to walk back in. They thought they'd cut me out, but really, they'd just opened the door. The night before they cut me out, I was standing under soft patio lighting on the rooftop of the Marlowe Hotel, guiding a client through the final phase of a $46 million rollout. The skyline shimmered behind us, glass and metal reflecting amber lights. Conversations murmured like silk between wine glasses and linen napkins. I wasn't nervous. I'd run this deck a dozen times. David Tran, the client's CFO, was sharp, methodical, the kind who appreciated precision. I'd structured the architecture down to contingencies they hadn't even considered. I knew where we were headed, or at least I thought I did. Rohan was there too, of course, smiling like he always did. The kind of smile that made people feel comfortable while never revealing anything. When David's team asked about vendor timelines, I leaned in and clarified the handoff phases. Everyone nodded. I saw it in their eyes. They were with me. Then Rohan's phone buzzed. Just one subtle vibration, but enough to make him glance down. He smiled, excused himself, and said he needed to take a quick call. His laptop, still open beside the charcuterie board, flickered softly. I wasn't looking. Not at first. I reached to move my charger cable, which had gotten tangled around a wineglass stem. As I straightened it, the screen shifted slightly toward me, and there it was. Slack. One thread, one glowing message across a dark background. Let her pitch, then restructure her out. I didn't blink. I didn't move. My hand stayed frozen around the glass. For half a second, I couldn't even feel the stem pressing into my fingers. The room didn't spin. The world didn't stop. But something in me realigned. It wasn't just betrayal. It was orchestration. They had planned to let me finish, let me close the deal, and then erase me. Not confront me, not challenge me, just step over me. Rohan had left the screen open like he didn't think it mattered. And in that moment, I realized it didn't, not to him. I wasn't a person in the room. I was a tool, a delivery mechanism for a win he intended to claim the next morning. The screen dimmed. I released the charger, smoothed my jacket, and turned back toward the group. David was still mid-sentence explaining something to his CTO. My smile returned perfectly calibrated, a shade more relaxed than before, just enough to make it invisible. David raised his glass toward me. To Elena, who made this make sense. There were polite claps, a nod from their counsel. Someone murmured impressively. I thanked them, I think. I honestly can't remember what I said. I only remember how loud the clinking of glasses felt in my ears. Rohan returned a minute later. Cool, composed. He sat down like nothing had happened. Everything all right? He asked. I smiled. Perfect, I said. And I meant it, because now I was no longer part of their equation. I was calculating a new one. The rest of the night was theater. I answered every question with clarity. I walked through phase 4 like I wasn't quietly watching the knife being cleaned before the cut. It didn't matter now. They could have the pitch. But the deal, that wouldn't land where they expected. Later, I watched Rohan float through the room, shaking hands, laughing at jokes he didn't understand. He looked like a leader. He looked successful. But all I could see was that message. Let her pitch, then restructure her out. They had done this before. Maybe not in writing. Maybe not this cleanly. But I had felt it. In every project where the credit shifted at the finish line. In every meeting where my name was replaced with someone else's. But this was the first time they said it out loud. This was the first time they wrote it down. I didn't drink that night. Didn't eat much either. I just smiled and floated. I let them believe they were ahead. I let them finish their celebration. I took a few photos. I posed with the team. And then just before I left, I stepped into the hallway. Called a number I hadn't used in months. When Rajat picked up, I said 6 words. We're moving. Quietly. It's time. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. When I returned to the table, David had already signed the pre-agreement. A formality, but one that would matter later. I slid it into my folder and sat down. The night air was warm. The skyline was still lit, but something inside me had gone cold. That was the moment I stopped working for Sinclair. They just didn't know it yet. I'd spent 5 years building strategies for other people's visions. I'd been precise, loyal, invisible. Now I had seen their plan. And for the first time in my career, I had one of my own. That Slack message wasn't the first time someone tried to erase me. It was just the first time they put it in writing. The truth is, I had seen this pattern before. The first was at Meridian Diagnostics, a mid-sized biotech company pivoting into machine learning. I had led a full overhaul of their regulatory framework from FDA positioning to scalability across 4 product lines. When the partnership announcement went live, the press release credited Martin Cho, head of innovation. He hadn't even joined until month 3. But his name looked better. Mine was nowhere. I remember reading the headline in my car, holding a printout of the architecture map I'd finalized the night before. No anger, just silence. I folded the paper and walked into the building like I always did. The second time was worse. A global logistics firm called Harlow needed help merging its North American and European operations. The data pipeline was broken, the leadership was scattered, and their vendor contracts were out of sync. I came in as a consultant and ended up reworking the entire operating rhythm. I thought that would be the one. The project closed clean. Cost savings, higher margins, stability across regions. I trained the junior team, wrote the implementation deck. The client sent flowers, and still, when promotions rolled around, I wasn't even mentioned. My manager smiled and said I was too valuable where I was. Too valuable to move. Too independent to promote. I told myself it was fine, that being useful was better than being visible, that as long as I did great work, someone would notice, that someone would say her name. But they never did. The third time was what finally broke something in me, even if I didn't admit it back then. It was with a retail systems company, Aurex. They were rolling out a new predictive inventory platform across 300 locations. The timeline was brutal. The code was a mess. Half the team didn't even believe it would launch. I cleaned up the back end, rewrote every key process, created a launch roadmap that saved them from losing a Fortune 100 client. I didn't expect a parade, just a sentence in the recap, a name in the footnotes. Instead, I watched my roadmap show up under someone else's initials in a quarterly report. When I brought it up quietly to my manager, he said it must have been a formatting issue. I remember nodding, saying no worries. Then I walked to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror for 10 whole minutes, not crying, just standing there. Why wonder why I kept letting it happen? I think I believed good work would protect me. Those results were enough. That politics and visibility and playing the game were optional? I was wrong. They didn't want precision. They wanted pliable. They didn't want me to build systems. They wanted me to fix the broken ones without asking why they were broken to begin with. And each time I kept working. That was the part no one saw. Not the betrayal, the after. Showing up the next day, smiling, fixing decks, training people who got credit for ideas I shaped from scratch. That's what builds the deepest fracture. Not one moment, but the quiet repetition of being overlooked until invisibility becomes familiar. So that night on the rooftop, when I saw the words on Rohan's screen, it didn't shock me. It confirmed something I had tried too long to unsee. I wasn't part of the plan. I was the scaffolding they used before painting the facade. And this time, I was finally done holding it up. We met at a small cafe tucked between 2 galleries on a quiet street off Lexington. It was the kind of place where the music never rose above a whisper, and the barista knew everyone's order by the second visit. David was already seated when I arrived. Sleeves rolled, no tie, a plain watch on his wrist that told me he never needed to prove anything. He stood when he saw me, offered a warm smile, and thanked me for making the time. I told him I was glad we were keeping things moving, assuming this would be about the rollout pacing, or maybe a vendor clause. He didn't nod. Just sipped his coffee slowly and looked at me like he was trying to understand something beyond the numbers. Then, after a pause that lingered longer than expected, he asked why I was still at Sinclair. I blinked. Not because I didn't understand the question, but because no one had ever asked it out loud. I started to respond some generic answer about loyalty or unfinished work, but the words caught in my throat. He set his cup down and leaned in slightly. He said I had anticipated every risk before his team did. That I clarified things they didn't even know needed clarifying. That what I'd built wasn't just efficient, it was elegant. I felt my chest tighten, not from pride, but from recognition I hadn't realized I needed. He said he wasn't trying to meddle, but if I ever wanted to build something on my own, he'd back it. No pitch, no pressure, just an open door. I smiled awkwardly, made a quiet joke about hypotheticals. He shook his head gently. He said he didn't deal in hypotheticals. He dealt in outcomes. Then he stood, thanked me again, and left. No dramatic exit, no follow-up ask. Just calm certainty that something real had been offered. I sat there for a long time after he left. Stirring a coffee I never drank, watching the traffic blur past the window like I was in someone else's moment. I didn't leave that cafe with a business plan or a promise. Just a question that looped in my head all the way home. What if I could? The name came first. Chiron. A nod to the centaur in mythology who taught others to heal while carrying his own wound. It felt right, quiet, sharp, a name that carried history and intention without needing to explain itself. I reached out to Rajat, a lawyer I trusted not because he was clever, but because he never flinched at complexity. He used to handle compliance at Sinclair before they pushed him out for caring too much about the rules. I told him what I needed. It had to be clean. No fingerprints, no shortcuts. He didn't blink. Then we begin with a shelf entity, he said. Delaware. Standard. Low noise. We opened the account under Chiron Dynamics. No logo, no press, just a name, a number, and a password known only to me. I wasn't building an empire. I was building a container. Something that could hold my work when the moment came to move. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. No client files, no proprietary data, just frameworks. Forecasts I'd designed from scratch. Roadmaps where I had rewritten every milestone after someone else had filled it with fluff. I backed them up carefully, meticulously, without a trace. Zoya noticed first. She always did. She found me in the server room late one night, scanning through my own folders. "You're not here for logs, are you?" she asked. I looked up, said nothing. Just handed her a flash drive. No names, no dates, no clients, only clean architecture. She nodded and said, "Give me 2 hours." When she returned the drive, she added a note. "You shouldn't have to hide your own work." I nodded once and renamed the master file, Chiron AI V1. It was still the same model, but now the author line was mine. Every move was small, deliberate. I chose a vendor who didn't ask questions. Picked a font that matched no Sinclair template, created a folder tree I could navigate blindfolded. It wasn't revenge, it was insurance, protection against the moment I already knew was coming. They thought they had the board, but I had been playing a different game, and I had just moved in. The morning after I was erased, I sat alone at my kitchen table laptop, open coffee going cold beside me. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the wall clock. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired. I opened the final draft of the infrastructure agreement, version 12. Every clause was reviewed, every dependency is balanced. It was the same contract I'd built over months, but now it bore a different title across the top. Chiron Dynamics, clean, unattached, no Sinclair logo. I scrolled slowly through the document. There were no edits left to make, just one empty field. I hovered over the signature block, felt the weight of that moment settle into my shoulders, and typed my name. Elena Ross, CEO. I didn't pause, didn't second guess. I clicked save. Then I opened my inbox, pulled up the message I'd written hours earlier but hadn't sent. At the top, 3 words. Same deal, new direction. I attached the contract and hit send. No dramatics, no explanation, just delivery. For a moment, there was nothing. I stared at the screen, hands still resting on the keys. Then 3 minutes later, a reply. David. Approved. Let's announce jointly this Friday. The wire is on the way. Congratulations, Elena. I sat back slowly, spine straight against the wooden chair. No applause, no champagne. Just the quiet acknowledgement of a deal well earned. Not inherited, not borrowed, built. An hour passed before the first ripple hit. Zoya texted from the Sinclair building. Rohan was locked in a conference room. Legal was circling. Someone from procurement had asked who Chiron Dynamics was and why they hadn't seen the name before. By midday, the head of compliance called an emergency sync. PR was scrambling to update the language for the quarterly report. My phone buzzed again. Novira's legal team had requested onboarding packets for Chiron. Quietly, deliberately. They were realizing too late that the ink had already dried. Just not in their office. Sinclair's homepage still listed the infrastructure deal as ongoing negotiations. I watched it, waiting to see when they'd pull it. They didn't. Maybe they couldn't admit it yet. Maybe they still thought it could be undone. That afternoon, Zoya messaged again. Someone asked Rohan if he'd closed the deal. He didn't answer, just stood up and left the room. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to explain. They had written me out of their story. I had simply chosen not to disappear. Later that night, I logged into the back end of the Chiron site. Until then, it had remained bare. Just functionality, no flair. I went to the footer and typed the words carefully. Elena Ross, founder, strategist. I didn't add CEO. I didn't need to. The city outside was lit in soft gold. A breeze moved through the open window. The world still turned. But everything felt different. Not louder, not bolder, just mine. Sinclair sent a letter the next morning. Legal threats dressed as concern. Allegations about IP, breach of contract, interference with clients. I forwarded it to Rajat. He replied with a sentence that made me smile. They listed you as a contractor for 5 years to avoid paying equity. No IP clause, no non-compete. That decision just became your shield. And it had. Their own silence, their own shortcuts. The ones they used to keep me small had now made me untouchable. That afternoon, David's office sent over the first wire confirmation. Chiron Dynamics. $46 million in infrastructure rollout, authorized. I read it twice. Then once more just to feel the finality. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't trying to destroy Sinclair. They weren't worth the fire. What I wanted was space. Control. The ability to finish what I started without asking permission to be visible. They tried to make me disappear, but instead, I became undeniable. The office was small. Just one desk, one chair, a borrowed monitor, and a window that looked out over the city like a quiet promise. There was no logo on the door, no receptionists, no polished lobby music. Just space. Clean, uncluttered mine. On the wall behind my desk, I had framed only one thing. A screenshot of the message. Let her pitch, then restructure her out. Black text on gray. 7 words that had almost erased me. 7 words that had started everything. It didn't feel like bitterness. Not anymore. It felt like clarity. A reminder that sometimes the things meant to break you become the blueprint for your rebuild. The flash drive Zoya had handed me sat next to my keyboard. I hadn't opened it again since the day we signed, but its presence grounded me. Proof of what I carried. Not just data, memory, ownership, voice. The door creaked open. My mother stepped in, slow and careful, one hand gripping the frame as she looked around. She hadn't been to the city in years, not with the traffic, not since her knees got worse. But she had insisted. She said she needed to see where I was beginning again. She scanned the room quietly, then smiled, and held up a small paper bag. Coffee, and those almond biscuits I used to love. I laughed and took it from her. You didn't have to, I said. She settled into the chair across from me with a tired sigh. I wanted to, she replied. Her eyes landed on the frame. She tilted her head, slightly read the message in silence. Then, without looking away, she said the one sentence that cracked something in me. They didn't erase you. They forced you to start. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She reached across the desk, her hand warm and steady on mine. The kind of touch that reminded you of everything you survived, just to sit in this moment. Outside, the city moved with its usual chaos. But in here it was still. Focused. Beginning. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to see me. I already had.